Across the isthmus to the historic site of Jamestown, the first settlement of the British. Federal government's lack of funding and the worst efforts of the people who want to make it as difficult as possible to get into these national historic sites. There's a group of volunteers who are bypassing that. We'll go around this way. That says it all. However, they can't stop me from taking a photo of the monument depicting the site of the first landing of the British on Americans. It's the original site where the archaeologists are still working on their first British settlement in the Americas at Jamestown. There's a replica village further in town. This is the real thing. Sorry, yes.
Sure. We need to do more research on it. But it's not in the right place. It's one thing, it's oriented north and south, and the burials here are oriented east-west generally. And it's only a partial stone. So in the 1800s, this cemetery was vandalized, people taking souvenirs by breaking up the tombstones and taking pieces with them. So we think that's why that's broken up and just tossed out here.
Here in the past, started in '94. I was a part of this very small team along with Dr. Kelso to start excavating, to look for the beginnings of America's birthplace. All the graduate students, when they show up here, day one, we have a 6-week graduate course we teach every year in the summer, is context is everything. Does everybody understand? We found a 1st century AD Roman oil lamp right outside the church tower here. Does that mean this is a Roman site? No. But when you look at it in context of the soldiers that were here, they would collect things on their travels around the Mediterranean, and somebody picked up a Roman oil lamp in North Africa and brought it here to Jamestown. The case here, these are gentlemen soldiers, they're elite folks that have been fighting against the Spanish their entire careers in the lowlands, and there was stratified society here. There's a chef or a cook. There's people who are supposed to go out and shoot game, things like that. So when you cut off those supply lines, just like anywhere else, it's no mystery. They go to the Indians for food, and that, anytime you go to your neighbors with the .357 Magnum and say, "Can I borrow some eggs?" it's not going to end up well, right? So that's what happens. 20 years of digging. In '94, we started looking for some artifacts. We thought before it was washed away. Everyone thought it was washed away given the erosion. That proved not to be the case. In '94, Dr. Kelso, my director of archaeology, began digging. He chose a spot between the tower, the church tower, which you guys walked through, and the water down here. The idea was that churches are sacred places, and if this is the 1617 church, which we now believe it to be, how could it be moved very far from the original 1608 church? And it turns out he was right. We found the 1608 church that's right outside the door there. So with that in mind, the tower, the water, he began digging, and there's no mystery. If you wanted to find, let's say, graves, you would dig a hole, and if you have half a grave going west, which way do you dig? West. So in 1994, Dr. Kelso came down on one of the earliest pits ever found here, pit 1, and we just expanded out from there. For 20 years, we've been digging one square after another. They come here thinking that the cavalry of Spanish soldiers are going to come across the field, and they end up fighting the Virginia Indians, who are guerrilla warfare. They don't fight fair. So they built this triangular fort, which you guys see around here, based on a European mode. Now the Indians forced them to build that, but they build what they know. Year 2, 1608, totally different fort. In this clay, features, or what we call cultural activity, has been punched through. So the latest stuff that we're looking at probably is right here. This is a grave. Can you guys see the discoloration? We had a little rain. Somebody's cleaned one up here. These are graves of folks that were buried. Those graves are cutting other features, including this purple line of purple flags that goes over there, and that's the 1608 palisade, described by many of the colonists. And then this summer what we found are these features, which you guys probably think we're crazy just marking these lines in the dirt, but you can see them a little bit today. See these dark stains? This is where the colonists in 1607 decided they were going to have a garden outside. Got a quote from John Smith. Remember, we're historical archaeologists, so we have the evidence. Now we got to figure out what it means with history, right? Most of the time, folks read the history and try and figure out what the archaeology means. That's not what we do. We are looking at the empirical, the stuff you can't argue about, and what that means to what was written. So we have two quotes, Gabriel Archer and John Smith. John Smith says, "We grew our corn." Now, historians have argued that means wheat or barley versus Indian corn. They had about a month before they settled here at Jamestown, 20 plus days to be with the Virginia Indians. I think they could have gotten a handful of corn. Second is Gabriel Archer says pineapples, oranges, and sweet potatoes and cotton trees they picked up in the West Indies on their way up here. Now, how do I figure that out? Archaeology is a multidisciplinary field. So what I did last week with Mariana Richardson, one of our staff archaeologists, is we dug down to the bottom of this furrow and took a soil sample, which I'm going to send to the West Coast, well, Arizona. And they're going to look for pollen and phytoliths, which are essentially fossilized plant remains. And they're going to tell me what was growing out here in 1607 before these were sealed up inside the fort. This is a cellar, just like you'd have under your house, under a building that's associated with a complex, we believe a complex that dates to the starving time. So it's 1608 is when it's probably initially constructed. It is the fort kitchen. So we have a series of bread ovens. For you folks over here, you can see one here. Before we had found evidence of cannibalism here at Jamestown, historians had said didn't happen. Well, when we found the evidence of this person, it was absolute clear marriage of history, archaeology, of course science, forensic science, to determine and in a large way humanize and define some of the people here at the fort, obviously some of the women. So that's what we found. Now, how do we know about this person? You guys watch CSI or Bones? We use those people. That's what we do, except our crime scene isn't solved in 45 minutes, right? It's 20 years and we're still going. But the first thing we did was to remove the bones in an effort to honor the dead here. We found the fragments of Jane on a Friday. We waited till Monday to block it out, take it in the lab. By Wednesday, I had brought my dentist in on when his day off was Wednesday to look at the teeth because they were a bit abnormal. And when I walked into the lab, it was the first time I'd seen the fragments cleaned off. And it was clear. I said immediately to my dentist, I'm going to have to enact doctor-patient confidentiality here. And he laughed. And I said, no, I'm serious. Because sitting on the table on the screen was this cranium that had clearly been chopped and cut with multiple tools, different tools. And the gravity of the situation hit me then. Here we have a case where every tour I've ever given prior to us finding Jane, somebody asked, did they really eat people, right? You know, there's a lot of play with Walking Dead these days and zombies, and that's not where we wanted to go. We didn't want this to be dehumanized. This was a 14-year-old girl. So at that point, we took the remains to the Smithsonian, and we worked with Dr. Doug Owsley, who is the foremost forensic anthropologist for colonial societies in the New World. And Doug looked at it and he said, good gosh, you guys, this person has been processed to be cannibalized, there's no doubt. And I said, Doug, do you have evidence in your collection? You know, Smithsonian has thousands of human remains that have been donated or excavated. And he said, absolutely, I can show you multiple examples. So the big picture is there's 9 criteria for evidence of cannibalism. We have 8. We have 8 of those criteria. The only one we're missing is cooking, and this person wasn't cooked. another. So what we did is dig that half out and then we get a nice view. Fortunately, we had the layers pretty well down, but what I did is went in there with my Galaxy S4 and did a panoramic scan of the profile.
They're refueling, that's what they're doing, on their way south. We saw these guys up in Canada.